At last, when do these two rising meteoric talents collide and create the many wonderful books that we're all enjoying now? Mike, you want to tell your part of the story? Then I guess we'll let David tell the parts that you leave out. I don't know, however that'll work.
That sounds good. Yeah, so David and I knew each other. We were, I guess, more acquaintances. We would see each other at conferences, and I knew of David. I mean, I always admired his books, like The Best Pen of All. I remember when that came out, and I'm like, wow, that's a great book. But I mentioned to a friend of mine, John Coy, that I was thinking about writing, and I had just been to New York. I showed my portfolio to some editors and my sketchbook as well, and they said that encouraged me to start thinking about writing. So I mentioned this to John, and a couple of weeks later, John called me and asked me if I'd be interested in joining their writers group, which I really hesitated. I just didn't think I was ready to do that, but I don't know what got into me, but I ended up saying yes to be a part of this group, and David was a part of this group, and that's where we became much better friends. And one day, David brought in this manuscript titled Moo, and I remember when he read it, he brought in some paintings as well. He wanted to be the illustrator, and he was really struggling with the color and so he brought in some of those paintings, and he brought in that little book dummy, and I knew David would do a great job of illustrating that book, but I just had this vision, Rob, of how I wanted to illustrate that book. It was really strong. And I went home that night and I told my wife about this book, and I just told her I want to illustrate this. But I know, and I honestly felt I would never be the illustrator, because I knew David would figure out those colors and he would do a great job with it. So then I just kind of forgot about that story. And then, David, you want to take it from there?
Well, I had this book dummy, and I had an editor who was interested in maybe publishing it. But as Mike said, I wanted to be the illustrator, and I just wasn't coming up with illustrations that matched with it, and just getting more and more frustrated. And right about that time, I got a postcard in the mail from Mike, who was having an art show. And he had a picture of one of his paintings on this postcard. And the picture on that painting was a cow. And when I saw that cow, I said, that is how I want the cow to look in this book. And as you might know, Rob, editors don't want the author to go out and find their friend to be the illustrator for the book. The editor wants to decide on the illustrator themselves. But boy, that cow was just perfect, and Mike had published books before, and I knew that he would do a good job. So after one of our writing groups, I said, Mike, is there any chance that you would be interested in illustrating this book? And Mike said,
Yeah, well, actually, I did hesitate because I really did feel like I'd be taking something away from David, but he reassured me that he wanted me to be the illustrator, and I was absolutely thrilled about that. And we approached a publisher that I'd been working with, Bloomsbury, had a very good relationship with them, and we sent a sample painting of mine and David's little book dummy. And I think we had a contract signed within a couple of months. They were very enthusiastic about the project right from the start. So
nobody ever said anything about, hey, you guys can't pick each other, we pick. That never came up as an issue?
They didn't say that, but they did say the following. Once they agreed to have the two of us be the author and the illustrator, they said, Mike, as you're starting to work on the illustrations now, please don't show any of them to David, even though we're in the same critique group. So what Mike had to do was he would send his sketches to the editor and art director at Bloomsbury. They would look at them. They would send them back to Minnesota to me, and I would make my comments and send those back to New York, and then they would get back to Mike here in Minnesota with any of the suggestions I might have had that they wanted to pass along. So even though we saw each other every other week in our critique group, we weren't supposed to be talking about the illustrations that Mike was working on.
Now, I have it on good authority that no one from Bloomsbury ever listens to the show ever. It's not a concern. Did you guys stick to that? Just us talking. No Bloomsbury aware, or did you occasionally be like, just before, while they're not looking, here's the illustration that I have so far here, critique group. Now I'll send it to the official channel.
We stuck to that for a while.
Yeah.
And then as later on the project, we bent the rule more and more. And I would say, Mike, that now our third book is out, and we're in the midst of working on, fourth and fifth book. We've gotten less and less. We've gotten more and more collaborative. We share our work much more freely now, right? Almost from the beginning. Mike comments on my manuscripts, and I'll run things by him before I'll send them to the editor, just because I value his opinion on the story so much. And Mike shares his sketches with me, or at least he talks about them. We don't feel like we have to have our lips zippered shut anymore.
No, not at all. I think that is one of the biggest things with working with David. I think we both just have to let our egos go. And we say this all the time, that everything is about making the best book possible. So if David does a great sketch in those dummies, and I sometimes will be my final illustration will be very close to that sketch, because David captured something, the essence of something. So it really is about letting our egos go and making everything work for the best book possible.
Yeah. And Mike gives suggestions on an idea that might make the book funnier, and even, I've learned, is just like Mike said, we want to make it the best book possible. Yeah, we're both real clear about that, aren't we, Mike?
We are. Yep. And like David said, each book has become a little more collaborative, and which is, I think, the books are getting better because of that as well. Yeah.
That sounds like nothing but win. I'm assuming that sooner or later there's been some sort of disagreement. If not, maybe this is my opportunity to create one. I don't know. But does it ever happen where, David, you've got a sketch and you say, well, I feel this is pretty good. And Mike says, well, it's pretty good, but what would be great? And then he whips up something that's maybe a little bit better. If you ever come to loggerheads, how do you resolve that and everybody remains friends and the books keep coming?
Oh. I hope you're not jinxing us, Rob.
Yeah, that too.
Something bad is going to happen. Boy, as far as, well, like when I share my stories with Mike and he gives me suggestions, I know, like the most recent story we sold, Mike gave me three really good suggestions for the story, and I used two of them, and one of them I didn't, and Mike was okay with that. He said, well, you're making a mistake and not using my idea, but we didn't. And when Mike sees my sketches, I just trust him completely to use anything that might be worthwhile. But I also know that he's the professional artist, and what he decides, boy, I'm in agreement with. I've given some suggestions for improvements for his illustrations through the editor, but whatever Mike decides about it, I trust him wholeheartedly to make all the artistic choices in the end. I have complete confidence in him.
Yeah. And I feel the same way about David, as far as, Rob, I am the luckiest illustrator. I get to illustrate these brilliant concepts that David comes up with, and I just feel, I defer to David. If he feels strongly about something, I feel it's a good decision. So I think we both have a lot of respect for each other. So,
but if you want to know, there's your
once a show guest appearance.
Yeah,
esteemed audience watches for her. They know that sooner or later she'll come along. I'm sorry, David. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, but if you want to know the area where we do disagree and we do get loggerheads with, there is one big difference in our personality. Where our personalities are very similar, which is works well. We've had to do a lot of traveling together. For example, with our book Moo, we were asked to come up with a program, preschool program, and travel to 60 libraries across the state of Minnesota giving this program. So we spent a lot of time in the car together. But there is one area where we differ completely, and that is I am the type of person who likes to get places very early, very, very early, and I have a fear of being late. Unlike Mike, go ahead, Mike.
I like to get there on time. I feel it's rude to get there too early. No, I am not very good. I'm usually late. I'm usually running behind. And David definitely. So we had a compromise. He wanted to get to the library an hour before we had to present. We decided on 30 minutes. Was that right, David?
No, I wanted to get there 2 hours before
the
event, and the compromise was an hour before the event.
So, those poor librarians, what are they going to do with you for 2 hours?
I know, that's what I said.
Don't listen to them, Mike. Don't listen to them. They like to know we're there. But Mike, we surprisingly get, I don't, maybe it shouldn't be surprised, but we fortunately get along very well. And many times I've thought there are a lot of people that I could not create books with. Our personalities just would not clash, or I would be upset, or I would get angry. And I don't get angry with Mike. I not yet. But boy, for some reason our personalities mash well enough together that things usually go smoothly. And as I said, there's not many people I could do the things that I do with Mike with.
Well, this sounds like the perfect author-illustrator relationship. Everything is going well. The books speak for themselves. We're going to get to a couple of those and talk about those in depth a little bit as well. But just out of curiosity, and Mike, I'll throw this to you. What would be the argument for the original proposition of keeping both of you as separate as possible and having you only go through the go-between? What's the upside of that?
Or what's the upside of keeping it?
Keeping you separate when this sounds like this is working out so well, and why can't all authors and illustrators everywhere do this?
That's a good question. I think the reason it works so well is because David is such a visual person. He is a very talented illustrator, and I don't know if a lot of authors have that visual sense, I guess. And I think a lot of authors that I've talked to that don't have that really like that the illustrator, isn't influenced by anything that the author has in their brain about how they think this book should look. So it really, because David is so creative and clever and visual, I love working, collaboratively with him. But there are lots of books that, I haven't even met the author before. It's just the words on the page. And I guess it's just it's a different way to work. And I really enjoy that as well, because then I'm, bringing my complete visual creation to the project. So it's just a different way of working. I don't know if there's really an advantage or a disadvantage of it. I think because it's David, it's an advantage to be more collaborative. But does that make sense? I don't know if that's answering the question very well, but.
No, it seems like other than you could be, 5-10 minutes late to a presentation if you wanted. if you're flying solo, what are they going to do? You're Mike, you're the author of the more than 30 books. You've got all the awards. So what are they going to say? They should be grateful you showed. No, don't listen to me. This is terrible advice.
That's right.
Stick with David. 30 minutes to an hour early is probably a great idea.
Well, and I'll add to that too, that we also both feel very free to be working with other people as well too. I have a book coming out that somebody else is going to be the illustrator for. And I brought in manuscripts to our critique group, and Mike said, "Oh yeah, that's a really nice manuscript, but I have no interest in illustrating it." And it feels like Mike can be honest about something that, well, I know I've asked him to illustrate things that he said, no, I would not like to be the illustrator for that. So we feel like we can create books on our own. And as Mike mentioned, Mike is a great author, so he definitely does books that he writes and illustrates that I just sit back and admire.